Welcome to a special edition of the Schilling Show Unleashed. This is a Facebook Live presentation. We're going live here about 8:30 on a Saturday morning. There's been something that's been getting in my craw recently, and it is this constant mantra of you have to show that you love your neighbor by wearing a mask. So we put together the 50 ways to love your neighbor in the age of COVID presentation for you here this morning. I want to go through these things with you one by one. It won't take long, but it's something good to keep in mind. We have such hysteria around us right now in this age of COVID, and everyone, including the pseudo-Christians, the pagans, the atheists, are using biblical passages, throwing them to my face and saying, you have to love me by wearing a mask, even though it's thoroughly dehumanizing and questionably effective. And frankly, I became sick of all of this. So what I decided to do was to put together 50 ways to love your neighbor in the age of COVID. There must be 50 ways to love your neighbor. You'll recognize the music in the background. All right, let's jump into the list here. Number 1, 50 ways to love your neighbor in the age of COVID. Don't go into a bathroom that doesn't comport with your biological sex. That's not very loving. Don't promote biological males. Let's go to number 2. Don't promote biological males competing with biological females in sports. Progressives do this all the time. Not loving. Number 3 of the 50 ways to love your neighbor in the age of COVID. Don't allow biological males into female locker rooms. That's very distressing to the females there and to their parents. Number 4 of the 50 ways to love your neighbor COVID edition. Don't drive a car before brain development is complete. You know these idiots driving around before their brains are fully formed at 25? Oh, good grief. And I guess the corollary to that, number 5 in the 50 ways, don't drive a car past the onset of cognitive decline. Some people say that's as early as 50. Gosh, I might not be able to drive my own car. Number 6, don't use electronic devices while driving. See people doing that all the time in the streets of Charlottesville and Albemarle County. Not loving. Number 7 on the 50 ways to love your neighbor COVID-19 edition. Don't drive while impaired. I wonder how many of these people telling me I need to be loving by wearing a mask will go out and drink a few beers and then get behind the wheel. Number 8, don't legalize or consume substances that are proven to be detrimental. Number 9 in the 50 ways to love your neighbor COVID-19 edition. Don't take things that belong to someone else. Number 10 goes right along with it. Don't break things that belong to someone else. We see a lot of that going on today, don't we? Number 11, don't scream into people's ears with a bullhorn in downtown Charlottesville, on the mall, or anywhere else. I say this, and it goes out particularly to my friend Joe Thomas, when that other guy named Joe screamed in his ear with a bullhorn. Oh, we have that one on tape. Not loving at all. Number 12 in the 50 ways to love your neighbor COVID edition. Don't vandalize, destroy, or remove historic documents, monuments, or anything else historic. History out of the history books. Not loving. Number 13, the 50 ways to love your neighbor. Don't paint obscenities on public property. That includes the Charlottesville police station and the streets in front of it. Number 14 in the 50 ways to love your neighbor COVID edition. Oh, this is really current. Don't block roads while protesting. According to our city manager, Dr. Teron Richardson, you may delay essential services to somebody in trouble. How could that possibly be loving? All right, let's go on to number 15 in the 50 ways to love your neighbor COVID edition. Don't destroy others' peaceful enjoyment of outdoor events with your offensive and loudly abusive protests. That includes people on Father's Day or any other occasion on the downtown mall trying to have dinner when you're screaming their heads off. Not loving. Number 16, don't demonize people because of their skin color. We're seeing more and more of that even in the local government schools. And number 17, along the very same lines, don't teach children that they are somehow guilty or bad because of their skin color. Oh, we have the documents. They're doing this in Charlottesville and Albemarle schools. And let me say, parenthetically, get your kids the hell out of government schools. Number 18, don't support the cancel culture. Number 19, don't advocate for the abolition of police. These are 50 ways to love your neighbor. What happens if you need a police officer and you have abolished them? You're not loving your neighbor that way. Number 20, don't commit violence against political opponents, i.e. Rand Paul, but we have plenty of that here in Charlottesville. Number 21 in the 50 ways to love your neighbor, don't subvert election integrity or the voting process. Mail-in ballots, anybody. Number 22, don't attempt to silence others because you disagree with their expression. That's going on constantly, including in the council chambers of City Hall when they are holding in-person meetings. Number 23, this is a big one. Don't covet what others have. That's not loving your neighbor, and I will lay this one, a lot of it, at the feet of the local politicians who excessively tax us, and to people in the pulpit who are preaching covetousness. It's anti-biblical. Number 24, don't kill preborn babies in the womb. How in anyone's world could that be loving your neighbor? Number 25, in these 50 ways to love your neighbor, the COVID edition, don't let a born baby die because you decided you didn't want her, wretched Ralph Northam. These are 50 ways to love your neighbor. Number 26, don't pay people more to stay home and do nothing than they would earn while working. That destroys their sense of self-worth, and it is anti-biblical. Number 27 in the 50 ways, this goes to all the people with those little 3-colored signs in 3 languages sitting out in their front yards who are virtue signaling. Don't welcome lawbreakers or border crashers. That is not loving. Number 28, don't disparage our founders. That goes to the University of Virginia, to local schools, and to the local progressives who hate George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, the rest, and hate them to the core, want to abolish them from vision and from being taught in local schools. Number 29 in the 50 ways to love your neighbor, don't condemn people for the acts of their ancestors. That wouldn't be fair, right, or loving. Number 30 in the 50 ways to love your neighbor, don't judge previous generations by today's standards. Robert E. Lee, anybody? Number 31, don't brainwash government school children to embrace ungodly principles regarding gender identity and human sexuality. I want to go back and say, this is going on in the government schools. Get your kids out of there. It's not loving, but it is what's happening. I think I missed a number there. Number 33, don't redefine language. Not loving. We know what words mean. Don't change them to suit your political purposes. Number 34, don't eradicate culture and art because it makes you somehow feel uncomfortable. Unloving. Number 35 of the 50 ways to love your neighbor, COVID edition, don't force people to bake cakes or arrange flowers against their will. Number 36, don't violate the oaths you've sworn to uphold. And this goes to our elected officials and their mask mandate. I will not comply, but you need to love me by not violating your oath of office. BLO Pistro, Ned Runaway, the rest of you. Number 37 in the 50 ways to love your neighbor. Don't abridge my God-given Second Amendment rights. How can I protect my family if you abolish the police, then you take my guns away from me? That's not loving me as a neighbor. Number 38. This is going out to all the greenies out there. If you truly want to love me and you believe in global warming and climate change, don't use electricity or anything else that would contribute to this global calamity. So you got to sell your Prius now. It plugs in, remember, that causes climate change. Number 39. This is a big one. Don't lie about COVID statistics. Don't tell me how many people died when maybe a good percentage of them, maybe even half of them, died with COVID, but not because of it. And a corollary, number 40, don't prevent me from taking hydroxychloroquine just because President Trump has said it's a good thing. This is happening all around us. Number 41, don't impede Christian worship. I take this one very personally as a Christian worship leader. Don't tell me I can't go to church and worship. That's not loving at all. In the 50 ways to love your neighbor, we're getting close to the end here. This one's really easy. Don't snitch. All those people working for the stooges in the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors calling themselves ambassadors, and all of those people reporting to the ambassadors and snitching on your neighbors. This is not East Germany. This is America. We don't snitch. Number 43, don't freeload. Hey, go to work, get a job. Don't take from me just because you don't want to do anything. And my goodness, that is promoted all over Charlottesville and across America these days. Number 44 in the list of 50 ways to love your neighbor, COVID edition, don't hate America. This is going to follow a theme. Number 45, don't vote for people who hate America. That would be Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and pretty much any Democrat, sadly. Number 46 in the 50 ways to love your neighbor, COVID edition, don't remain in a country you hate. Hey, I know there's a lot of people who will give you money for a one-way ticket to Venezuela. If you hate it so much in America, go somewhere else. And I would suggest you start with Venezuela and then work your way down from there. Number 47 in the 50 ways to love your neighbor, don't embrace or support Marxists or their front groups. And you know exactly who I'm talking about. Here we go. Number 48, don't saddle others with your hysteria. Not loving. Number 49, don't force others to go against their own beliefs and understanding of science just so you can feel better. And number 50, of the 50 ways to love your neighbor, COVID edition, don't pretend you're loving me while violating any or all of the above just because you're wearing a mask. Share this with your friends. Hey, support us on Patreon. Just go to shillingshow.com and click the Patreon button so we can keep this work up. And to all the mask holes out there, you know where you could take this mask and shove it.